Hello. If you're joining the webinar, we're glad to have you. This is measuring the impact of ChatGPT. We're starting a couple minutes early to let people come on in. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice. We do a lot of things to accelerate adoption of conversational AI. There's a media and content part of my business, and there's a consulting part of my business. But as of recently, there's a new business altogether, which is Project Voice Capital Partners, a venture capital firm created to identify and invest in early stage, top tier conversational AI companies and founders. And I'm general partner of that. Marc Ladin, who's one of the original venture capitalists in this young technology space, is a general partner in that. We're thrilled to have Adam Cheyer join us today, who's a venture partner with us, along with Neil Jacobstein. We'll talk about the team in just a little bit. But first, a little bit of decorum. We've got the last 20 minutes of this hour set aside for questions and answers. And if you don't mind, if you want to participate in that, there is a Q&A box that is somewhere on your screen. For me, it's on the bottom. It might be somewhere else, but locate that and please use it. And we'll go to that to pull questions when it's time. The chat is here for you. Please be respectful with that. Avoid a bunch of self-promotional stuff. I'm going to be talking about the industry landscape map. I'll be talking about a bunch of companies. Keep it respectful with whatever it is you have to say right there. All registrants of the webinar will receive the audio as well as video files of the recording after it's over. So usually we'll send that out within 24 hours as we receive it from Zoom. So with that, once y'all coming on in, this webinar broke all records for us in terms of registration for a webinar. So there's a lot of interest on this topic, and we're excited to deliver this. So before I get started, I'm going to throw a bunch of links in the Zoom, okay? The first one is for the fund itself. So there's a bunch of information there. We invite people who are interested in this space to participate. You do need to be an accredited investor to participate. There's lengthy definitions of what that means elsewhere on the internet. I'm going to post the LinkedIn post of mine with the conversational AI landscape map, along with where you can download the high resolution version of that if you're looking for that. And then finally, I'm going to post the link to Project Voice 2023 in here as well. So there's you a bunch of links. Never say I didn't give you anything. Okay, so we're going to get off and running here, and let me just figure out how to share my screen. Yeah, I think this worked. Let me go to play from start. Okay. I assume everybody can see this. If you can't, throw it in the chat that you cannot see it, and I'll see what I can do. Welcome to Measuring the Impact of ChatGPT on the Conversational AI Landscape. Again, my name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice. We're so glad to have you here and appreciate you making time in a busy week for us. Project Voice Capital Partners, as I mentioned, venture capital firm created with the sole purpose of identifying and investing in top-tier early-stage conversational AI companies. So I'm going to talk through the conversational AI landscape map, as well as about the fund generally. And then the second 20 minutes will be an interview between Marc Ladin and Adam Cheyer, and then the final 20 minutes will be Q&A. Project Voice Capital Partners. This is a slide that we previously used to start our slide deck, and a lot of press that we've gotten. We've been fortunate that a lot of people have found what we're doing of interest. I want to talk a minute before we even get into the landscape map about VC funds generally. And this has been all new to me. I've never been part of a venture capital fund before. And I'm what's generously called an emerging manager. And instead of somebody just calling me an idiot, the term that's used is an emerging manager. And I appreciate that. But, we're quick learners around here, and it's been a lot of fun getting up to speed. Venture capital funds, there's two baskets. Like everything, we keep things simple. This presentation is going to be simple. The first thing that makes a venture capital fund successful is definition. You're not trying to do too much. It's like any business venture. You're not trying to boil the ocean here. You've got a well-defined horizon for what you're looking at, opportunities you're considering. And what that does is it lets you make decisions quickly. Pattern recognition is critical for this area and probably many others. We're getting into a point now where we're seeing a lot of stuff surface again with ChatGPT's arrival that we saw 5 years ago with Alexa's arrival. Some of the same excitement, some of the same attempts to take advantage of opportunities. Pattern recognition is super important, and the ability to provide market signal upstream. So if somebody like us, with our experience as a team in this domain, participates in a company, there's a reasonable expectation for venture capital funds that are bigger and badder and invest more money for when a company needs more money later on, that they're doing something right. The other part of it is unfair competitive advantages. So our experience is definitely a competitive advantage. Our access to young companies is definitely an unfair competitive advantage. And then our access to information. I talk a lot privately about how the fact that my company puts on Project Voice, the main event for conversational AI here in America, gives us information, is one example of unique information that we have. Because so much of what makes a company successful goes beyond the technology. It goes to the fabric of the culture, and the temperament and the characteristics of the management. And you're able to see uniquely a lot of those things on display behind the scenes with a conference, publicly with a conference. So that's one area where, among several, where we have another unfair competitive advantage with what we're building with Project Voice Capital Partners. Why would somebody want to participate in a venture capital fund as an investor? The primary reason is fairly straightforward. Venture has superior financial returns on average relative to other asset classes. So if you believe that our team is able to source opportunities, due diligence on them, and make decisions on them better than you can, then it might be an opportunity for you. If you can do that better than us, we need to talk, and we'd love to talk. We need all the help we can get. But if you can do that yourself, you don't need us. You don't need anybody. Do it yourself. But if it's something that you can't do, then that's what we're here for. And then the returns, as far as venture capital funds are concerned, are higher on average, for multiple reasons, but an important one being that there's illiquidity associated with this asset class that other asset classes don't necessarily have. So for most people, the financial return is the main part. For some others, there's strategic value depending on what it is you're doing, but those are the main reasons. Founding partners of Project Voice Capital Partners, you're looking at us. So the two on the left, I'm not so sure how much of a competitive advantage we are, but the two on the right are two pretty big heavy hitters, and you're going to get to hear from one of them in just a minute. So I want to tell a quick story before I get into the landscape map. The person you're looking at here is, his name is Marc Webster, and around 2016 or maybe 2015 or so, he started a company called SaySpring. And this was just at the time where I was learning about Alexa and voice as a modality for conversational AI. And I had some people tell me, hey, you got to meet this guy. What he's doing is really neat. And SaySpring, by the way, is a company that was helping other companies create voice interfaces for Alexa and Google Assistant. So I had a chance to meet Marc in New York City in early 2017, and that led to inviting him to be part of one of the earlier podcasts that I did related to voice technology specifically. So note the date, June 29th, 2017. So, I met with Marc in New York. I was just so impressed at this guy, driven, sharp, incredible experience, great focus with what he was doing with SaySpring, had him on the show, even more impressed. Well, what do you think the bottom of this screen is going to show you? The next thing that happened, Adobe gets acquired a year later. So, and take note of the date there. So this sequence of events had a big impact on me in terms of thinking about venture capital, thinking about investing in conversational AI companies, whether in voice, whether in text, whether in chat, the modality doesn't matter, whether in fintech, whether in hospitality, whether in automotive, the vertical doesn't matter. Looking at this area of technology and getting involved. And so this was kind of a learning moment for me, to say the least, and one that's had an impact on where we are today. Natural language is the focus of the fun. Voice, text, chat. Our name is Project Voice. We don't just focus on voice. Voice, text, and chat, every modality that involves using natural language to engage with technology around us, that's what we're focused on. So that brings us to the conversational AI industry landscape map. And this has, to my knowledge, nothing like this has ever existed. I took the lead on creating this. This was a product of Project Voice Capital Partners, for several reasons, not the least of which is we were involved in all sorts of conversations, and still are, where somebody will say, oh, okay, so you do that stuff related to ChatGPT. Isn't that the only company? They don't even know what the company is. Isn't ChatGPT the only company that does that? Like, isn't that kind of a solved problem at this point? It's the exact same discourse that I often had when Alexa was emerging on the scene. Oh, well, why would anybody do anything on the voice side? Because here's Amazon, and then later here's Google, and also Apple's out there, and Samsung. Why would anybody bother doing this? It's a solved problem. And the conversational AI industry landscape map, if it does nothing else, communicates rapidly that this is not a solved problem. Okay, you don't have this many companies doing all this stuff if it's a solved problem. Furthermore, what even is the problem? You tell me, because all of these companies are working on so many different things that it would kind of blow your mind. And so we wanted a visual that got across the breadth of conversational AI all in one glance. And I think that we accomplished that. The other repercussion of that is it signals that, hey, we have a pretty good line of sight on this space, right? I mean, we didn't just throw this together. We put this together in a way that really hadn't been thought of before, the way that we came up with the categories. And in doing so, it shows our depth, and we're proud of that. And so that's the other thing that is going on here. So I want to take a moment and highlight an organization within each one of these quadrants. So I'll start with frameworks. Cobalt Speech is, by the way, we're going to release, when we release version 1.2 of this asset, this conversational AI industry landscape map, there will be accompanying it a resource that makes this easier to navigate. It's 400 or so companies on this thing, so we realize it's a little large, to intuitively move around. We're going to try to help with that. Cobalt Speech is within frameworks. I want to call them out. So there's a ton of companies. Frameworks is north facing on the map here. So obviously there's a tremendous number of companies in there, many of which are broken out by industry vertical. And then there's some cross-industry companies that span all kinds of industries that are up at the top. Cobalt Speech is distinguished by the fact that Jeff Adams was one of the original computer scientists involved in the creation of Alexa, and has been around the speech recognition landscape for many, many years, and is super respected. So, the Cobalt Speech logo is one of many logos on here, but they punch way above their weight in terms of what they do. And that's a veteran team that we have a lot of respect for. Big tech, Amazon. So, I'm not really keen to call more attention to these companies that hog the spotlight anyway, but I find Amazon interesting simply because how many times in their corporate history have they been the underdog? You're not hearing anything from Amazon about Alexa unless it's residual information about layoffs. You're not hearing anything about the product at all. They're quiet. They're sort of lurking underneath the surface. It's a super unusual posture for such a large company. And that definitely has our attention, and we're paying close attention to, rumors we're hearing and what their next move may be. Open source. So part of this landscape map, we thought it was important to contemplate organizations providing open source tools and resources to the market. Rasa is one that I like a lot of things about them, but the thing I like about them the most is how adept they are at cultivating community within their developers and other people that are drawn to their platform. They are easily in the top 10 companies within conversational AI at serving their community, cultivating their community, growing their community, not only with access to their staff, but also creation of resources. So usually that's associated with positive economic returns, and for them it has been so far. Advocacy, Open Voice Network. So the Open Voice Network is part of the Linux Foundation, and it is run by John Stein. And I want to take a moment and call John Stein up here to make a cameo appearance. I'm promoting him to panelist now. So the Open Voice Network is a critical advocacy organization for conversational AI. We are thrilled to be their partner, and I'm thrilled to give John Stein a cameo. John, how are you?
Bradley, I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for the cameo, and thanks for the shout out. Very much appreciated.
So take 30 seconds. Tell us who Open Voice Network is.
Nonprofit, vendor neutral, focused on the future. Where is it going? And for that, technical standards that's going to lead to the future of voice that works like the web, and ethical guidelines that make voice worthy of user trust.
I'm happy to call you up here. I love a good cameo. This is perfect. John, we love you. We love what you're doing. Thanks for being part of the webinar with us.
Bradley, thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you got it. So I'm going to put you back as attendee, and I'm going to reshare my screen. Let me play from current slide. So that was Open Voice Network, who we have a lot of respect for. LXT. LXT is a data organization. They just released their Path to AI Maturity Report, which I'll throw in the chat in just a moment. I won't exit this presentation to do that since I just did it. But they're an up-and-coming organization. We pay close attention to them. I really like the report that they released last year, which they just updated this year. I'm going to throw it in the chat when I'm done here in just a moment. I'm going to try to stay on time. Generative AI, there's a tremendous number of companies here, and when we publish a new version of this, there will be even more. The one I want to call your attention to is among the first investments that Project Voice Capital Partners is making, according to public statements we put out. We're doing diligence on them now. We love these guys. They have created a tool and a framework to enable all kinds of people, from small to medium-sized business owners to videographers to other types of content creators, to a number of other use cases, to take a snippet of audio, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, doesn't matter the length, and create a video spontaneously, generatively, out of that audio. It's really cool. It's well executed. We're a fan of those folks. ASR and NLP NLU, so automatic speech recognition, natural language processing, and understanding. These are companies that are knee deep in the value chain of a lot of other companies in the space. I'm going to call your attention to two of them. Sonus, which is along the right-hand side of that quadrant, which faces south on the map, was controversial. They were in the news because their technology enables the de-accenting and perhaps re-accenting of voices. So if I am calling into a contact center and I'm talking to an individual whose accent is hard for me to understand, Sonus technology makes it easy to understand by changing the accent to a different type of individual, whether that's by race, whether that's by gender, or whatever. And you can imagine some of the news articles that have been written about that, but you can also probably imagine the utility of that. Super interesting company, one we're paying close attention to. The other one I'll call your attention to is Applied Brain Research, who has a patent on the optimal algorithm to synthesize energy consumption and speech recognition on a single chip. They are another company that is poised to be part of our first vintage of the fund. Cheyer is a testing company for conversational AI. They've got a webinar coming up. I'm going to throw in the chat that I think would be of interest to most people in this group. Sonic identity, there's a lot of companies thinking about how you brand yourself with all this stuff, whether from a voice point of view, primarily from a voice point of view. Your chat and text are secondary because that's just about the words you use. Blurp is essentially the Giphy for audio. They were part of an early Alexa accelerator, and they're a company that Voice Punch, the spiritual predecessor of Project Voice Capital Partners, Marc Ladin's original fund, invested in. And on the security side, Yobi with Tim Sutton does a lot of great work working with government to secure conversational AI. So Project Voice Capital Partners is our thank you slide from our presentation that I thought would be good to include. And I'm on time. I like being on time. Good. The second part of this webinar will be a fireside chat between Marc Ladin, who's my partner on the fund, the other general partner, and Adam Cheyer, venture partner on the fund, one of the most decorated and accomplished entrepreneurs in this space. And let me figure out, Marc, I don't see you. Where are you? Oh, there you are. You're both at the top. Good. That's let me, Adam, I'm going to promote you to panelist. And then Marc, there you are. I'm going to promote you. Adam, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Bradley. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And Marc's joining us. Marc, how are you?
Morning. I'm good. Good morning, Bradley. Good morning, Adam. And you, nicely done. I'm right on time.
I tried to keep us on time. I'm going on mute.
Awesome. Thanks, Bradley. And thanks, Adam. Nice to see you again.
Definitely.
So as Bradley introduced me, I'm Marc Ladin, and I'm a partner with Bradley at PVCP, or Project Voice Capital Partners. It's our fund that's focused on conversational AI, language, and really the intersection of interface and compute. So I've been dedicated, as Bradley said, investing in the space since about 2019. And I can honestly say with the latest iteration or wave around generative AI, we're at a really exciting inflection point in the industry's growth. And, fortunate today, I'm lucky to have joining me Adam Cheyer, who many of you may know, but just as a quick intro, he's a pioneer and industry giant in the area of AI and human-computer interaction. Adam's co-founded a lot of companies. He started Siri, he co-founded Viv Labs, he co-founded Sendshit, and Change.org. So Adam, as you might imagine, is a man who wears many hats. He's a technologist, he's a mentor to many great startups, and luckily we call him a venture partner at PVCP. And on top of that, I'll throw in Adam's also an incredible magician. Definitely worth checking out. And most importantly for today, he's the perfect person to have with us to talk about the current craze around generative AI and ChatGPT. So thanks, Adam, for joining us today for the Fireside Chat.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, so I know we didn't really rehearse this or anything. I don't know if you want to have any high-level thoughts you want to share first on ChatGPT, or if you'd like me to jump into some questions for you, whichever you prefer.
Sure, I'll give a couple of high-level thoughts. So in some ways, I've been predicting this for quite some time. For years and years, I've said that every 10 years, 10 plus years, a new paradigm for interaction emerges. And, you know, if you go back to the 80s, it was, you know, a mouse and multiple windows. About 10, 12 years later, it was the web with URLs and back buttons and hyperlinks. 10, 12 years later, it was the iPhone and smartphones, apps, pinch and zoom. And so I've been kind of predicting that around 2020 to 2022, the next interface would emerge, and it would be a conversational assistance metaphor, but in a very broad space. And I actually started Viv Labs back in 2012 to get, you know, working towards that goal. I tried to define many of the aspects of what such a vision would need, and I think we pushed forward a little bit. So I was kind of waiting and watching for something like ChatGPT to come along. I'm an advisor at the Allen Institute. They did a lot of the fundamental work on BERT and the transformers. I've been watching the progression, and yet when ChatGPT came out, even for someone who's been in conversational AI for 30 years, who's been waiting and predicting and watching, I was one of the first people using, GPT-3, and I looked at GPT-2, and it still blew my mind. And I think for many of us in the field, even though we knew it was coming, it was still surprisingly better in some aspects than we anticipated. So at a high level thought, I think in my lifetime, there have been a few transformative moments. The web is one of them. Smartphones is one of them. I think this truly will be at that level with all the good and the bad, the societal implications and change, good and bad, the gold rush of companies diving into it, just like when the web came out or apps were a thing. I think just like kids today can't remember or even imagine a time before the web. Kids today can't remember or imagine a time before smartphones. I think large language models, like right around now, will be a pivotal time where things are different afterwards than they were before at a pretty big level. And it doesn't happen very often. It doesn't come along. And, it's going to be fun to be right here in the space and watch it all come about and see how it progresses. But it's exciting times.
Thanks, Adam. It reminds me, when I got into investing in conversational AI back in 2019, I got a lot of questions like, are you early, right? Is it too early? And, I told people, I said, look, it's hard to tell if you're early, but everybody knows when you're late. And so you can't predict with accuracy exactly when they're going to blow up, but blow up it has. And so it's been interesting. So I think that's a great segue talking about this life cycle, this 10-year point. Since you've got the perfect background to ask this question and kind of talking about where we are in the adoption curve, looking at the ChatGPT and all the fervor that's happening. It's gone from, back in November when it fairly hit mainstream, this wow, and this amazing. And then it's now kind of seems in the last month or this month, it's kind of entered the, oh my God, I can't believe it said that phase. So how do these things normally play out? Is there like kind of like the 6 degrees of separation or whatever it is? Is there some kind of model that you use and how these things typically progress?
Well, I mean, you all have heard of the technology hype curve, where you go through the different phases. In the beginning, you're like, oh my God. And then you're like, then there's the negative downslope of, oh, this is not what it was promised, and I'm angry at it not being perfect or not being everything that the hype, the upswing said it was. And then if you can make it past this trough of despair, it then just goes into this long plateau where people use it. It's not, better than sliced bread. It's just sliced bread, but it permeates everywhere. And I've been lucky enough to be on the cusp of a bunch of these. So I've seen it play out. Before Siri came along, there were no voice assistants in devices. Afterwards, there were a whole lot. And today, Siri is not the greatest thing ever. It's not the worst thing ever. It's just part of our lives and everyone uses it. Similar with change.org. There were no social networks for social change before change.org in 2006. There were a lot afterwards. Sentient was a company I did. There were no cloud computing for machine learning, large scale machine learning clouds before Sentient in 2007. There sure were a lot afterwards. So in my mind, I think Project Voice hit the timing perfectly, right? Literally perfectly. You kind of put this together a good year plus, maybe, you know, a year ahead of the big wave. You've been doing your research and looking at it, and man, this thing is going to go through the hype curves. But yeah, when the whole ChatGPT experience reminds me so much of Siri, in that it was on late night TV and everyone's like writing about it. And then journalists kind of went after it and tried to show all the failings of it. And we're kind of finding the right phrases where they could trick Siri into saying something that would make a big negative story. And, you know, the movie Her was coming out, and it was like this big mix of you know, positive and negative. Companies, from big companies to small companies, were scrambling to say, oh my gosh, what does this mean for us? I know so many. There was a company, Evie, that rebranded themselves to be a voice assistant. They were something very different before Siri came along. The big companies, Microsoft came out with Cortana. You know, everyone had to jump in and claim their space in the mind share of what's going on. And I see all of those same elements with the ChatGPT and large language models phenomena. Ultimately, the question is, does it get through the trough of despair? Is there enough substance there? Is there enough value there that it's not just a fad that explodes? Because we've been in speech and language a long time. You know, you can go back and look at General Magic in the 90s. It was, you know, big brouhaha and voice, and
Yeah.
but it wasn't quite ready yet. It wasn't quite there yet. I think it's clear that in the same way that Siri is now, Siri-like systems and Alexa and all of the Google assistants is now just sort of pervasively used by billion plus people without thinking much about it. Kind of like Google Maps. It's not an amazing AI thing. It's just, of course, we just use it everywhere. Of course, we should be able to get driving directions to any place. I think ChatGPT and large language models, you know, a year from now, 2 years from now, will be that. But really important, infused in every aspect of our business, our consumer devices. It'll be everywhere. I think some of the novelty will have worn off, but I do think there's absolutely enough value that this is going to change everything in many ways. So one comment, I know we're, you know, Project Voice is very voice and language interface driven. I'm actually as excited about large language models and ChatGPT being a behind the scenes common sense substrate to graphical interfaces, to make software, all software, whether it has a chat interface or a voice interface or not, the capabilities of these large language models. And, you know, we've never had a system quite like that before. It used to be programming in software. You'd have these, if the string equals this exact value, then do this. And if the string is that value, do something else. So very rigid, very preconceived. But if software can just call out through a language interface behind the scenes and start to get this kind of common sense reasoning capabilities that humans have, and that ChatGPT and similar seem to be able to answer questions in a human-like way, I think all software becomes smarter, more flexible, more human-like, more intelligent. whether it has a voice interface or a chat interface or not. So I'm interested in that aspect. Obviously, behind the scenes, it's all natural language in and out, but that doesn't have to necessarily be the only experience that we have.
Yeah, you really make a really good point, Adam. Just double clicking on that for a second. So thinking about, the true reality of a real no code software solution where you don't really need to know how to program. So as a technologist, I think we all get excited about the opportunities and the potential for these things. The flip side is, as you think about the cost, where the cost of creating content or programming goes to close to zero. How does the world adapt to those changes? Like where do you see the biggest disruptions coming?
I do think software engineering is going to go through a big change, and it hasn't changed really in decades. That was probably for me the most surprising thing about large language models, is that they could code. And at their core, all they do is they try to predict the next word, right? And they've gotten very, very good at that by looking at lots of text and using attention models and transformer models to get really good at that. But that feels intuitively so superficial. Like, yeah, it can auto-complete the next word, but does it really understand what it's doing? It doesn't know math. It's just giving you symbols, right? Without understanding. But when you interact with these things in terms of code, it really seems to understand the code that it has. You can have dialogues with it and ask it questions or give it new requirements, and it will know what to update. It understands the code that it's generated and is able to make modifications appropriately within that. That blew my mind. And there's some evidence that shows that because OpenAI trained over code, the logic, causality and sequencing and loops and iterators and variables, the causality aspects of code is now crossing over into more general, less discrete language concepts. So when a large language model feels like it actually understands a problem, when it gives you that nuanced response, it seems like there's some evidence that it's actually almost reverse engineering common sense and logic in certain ways, just by predicting, by kind of looking at the words that are out on the web, understanding how humans must think in order to generate those words. I think it's crazy and fabulous. So yeah, interesting question, but I think it will change how software is built. I do think it's going to reduce not only the creation of software, but the maintenance of software. There's so much legacy code out there. Having systems like this that can take care of updating, translating, porting, fixing legacy code is going to be a huge aspect.
Yeah. So switching topic for just a second, something I think is fairly relevant from your background at Siri and talking about what's happening in the assistance world. So there's an interesting Reddit thread I think I read about how there's a level of embarrassment at Apple and Amazon thinking, why does our assistant sound so dumb compared to talking to ChatGPT? So what do you think, how do you think that's going to affect or impact kind of the development priorities or timelines for Siri and Amazon's Alexa? Will they get a lot smarter quickly, or what do you think will happen, or how will they implement this level of sophistication that's kind of been thrown into the world with ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have any inside information because I'm no longer at Apple. I'm no longer, working with some of these big tech companies on their assistants. The series of the world play a slightly different role than the ChatGPT aspects. Many of the things with the voice assistants are around integrations, right? You want to set a timer, you want to call this app with these parameters. It's all about the integrations and the functionality. And that's primarily what it's meant to be. And of course, Siri will, if you ask a general open question and answering type request, it'll today fall back to, the web search. Well, I found this on the web. But most of the value is not doing web search. It's for many different operations to be able to actually command and control and execute on these. So if that's the case, I mean, obviously it would be trivial to, instead of falling back to web search, you could, these companies could do a partnership with one of the large language models if they don't have one, or surface their own large language models as the fallback. It's hard to tell whether in the short term that's going to be a big win or not. Maybe they need to do it. Obviously, independent developers have found lots of ways to bring ChatGPT experiences into Siri using shortcuts or into Alexa. So there are low-hanging fruits you could do. I'm not sure the big companies will scramble to do those right away. These assistants have their use. That said, longer term, like go forward 4 or 5 years, where today ChatGPT and similar are largely large collections of text trained a couple years ago, and it does really good synthesis and summarization and generation across that text. And the Alexas and Siris are something different. Obviously, the technology and the capability of large language models, its ability to compose things together, is far beyond what any of the current assistants are doing today. So the question is, what's the hybrid? How fast will the two come together into a more seamless experience? I think it'll probably take a couple years. I don't think the big tech companies are going to scramble to do a patch right away. I could be wrong, hard to know, but I would say, 3 years, 5 years from now, the Siri stack or the Alexa tech stack will look very different than it does today. So the question is what happens in the short term, and maybe there's a quick patch, maybe not, but I'm betting probably not.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch that integration between search and assistance, and where those lines start to blur and become one thing. Does the consumer want both, right? And how, be different for different use cases, as you're saying, command-based interactions, turn on the lights. They do a great job with things like that. They're very store and retrieve kind of activities, but that GPT, the generative stories, going to be interesting to watch this evolve. It's going to be just, like get your popcorn, because it's going to be a fascinating.
I've said for a long time that you can sort of summarize AI as AI equals knowing and doing. And of course you want both, but it's hard. AI is hard. So you have to start on one side and try to go the other. So if you look at Google and ChatGPT, it's more about what I call knowing, right? It's about having a bunch of data and retrieving in some form, summarizing in some form results. Siri and Alexa has been much more on the doing side. It's about automation. Book me a restaurant for 2 people tomorrow night at this particular French restaurant in Palo Alto. And it will. It's getting live web service calls. It's automating a sequence of steps. So it's the desire is to have both. Everyone wants both, but you always have to start on one side or the other. And even though Siri and ChatGPT feel very similar in some ways, from a technical viewpoint, I put them on slightly opposite sides. So the question is, how does the doing system add good knowing? How does the knowing system add good doing? And that's always the challenge.
Yeah, that's the $1 trillion question. So one last question, then we'll open up Q&A from the audience. But so just maybe touch on, what do you see? Are there any specific or exciting areas in the development of these large language models or conversational AI universe that are particularly exciting, that you're excited about watching unfold?
Yeah, so obviously the large language models are surprisingly powerful in a number of different ways. The ability to adapt the response specifically to the context of what that user is asking for. These are not pre-canned responses. It is generating a custom response who's trying to adhere to the goals that you have given it. It's amazing, but there are also lots of shortcomings with today's systems. They don't access real-time information well. And yes, the Bing and others are saying, well, get a few real-time search results and generate your responses from that. That's a patch, right? That's not accessing real-time information in a broad context. It's a little different. So real-time is an issue. Accuracy is an issue, meaning and authenticity. Many times these systems will hallucinate. And if you think about how they work, it's like they're trying to please you by giving you the text it thinks you want to hear. And one of the reasons that they're interesting is they don't always generate the perfect response. There's some randomness in their response. There's actually a parameter, a temperature parameter on how much, do you take the top choice or do you spread it around and add some randomness? So when it's saying, and the answer is X, it's got a temperature parameter. Should I give you the real answer or should I give you a different one just to make it more interesting, right? So, and you want a mix of both, but we don't know how to do that well. There's a number of different problems. The fact that the chat experience is interesting, but it's only good for certain types of problems. It's not the optimal user interface for all problems. And I told Steve, I said, if it's on the screen, you want to touch it and directly manipulate it with your mouse or your pinch and zoom. If it's off the screen, you want to ask for it through voice or language. And the ultimate interface is when you can combine the two. So exactly what the user experience is like for such a system, I think it'll go far beyond just pure chat into some hybrid multimodal experience. Anyway, I think there are huge opportunities. We're just at the very, very beginning of the potential of this technology. There are problems to solve. Startups can really add value in that space. Big companies are all going to be going after that. What I would give as advice to you guys as you're looking at the landscape of startups, the frenzy of startups trying to create things in this space, the differentiator is going to come down to data. Who has unique data that they can use to train and adapt the large general pre-trained models to create something particularly customly good for a given domain, a given problem set or population set. And so those are things that I would look for, and if you're a startup out there, I would be asking myself, because they can innovate on interface, they can innovate on applications, on of how this technology will be used. But if you can have custom data that no one else will have, you don't have to generate a pre-trained model from scratch, but you can take that pre-trained model and then adapt it. I think that's really the sweet spot for value in this landscape. You can kind of stay at the surface with prompts, prompt engineering. You can raise, hundreds of millions of dollars to build your own large language model from scratch. But really for startups in particular, I think there are opportunities on how do you get data sets for particular problems that can adapt a given general model to produce better results for you. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That's great.
Thank you, Adam. I can keep asking questions on and on, but I know we want to save some time for the audience. Bradley, I'll turn it over to you if you want to do the Q&A orchestration.
Yeah, for sure. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. The chat is disabled. When we send the proceedings of the webinar out to all registrants, we're going to include all the links we posted. So don't feel like you need to swim up the chat and copy them all. We'll make sure to include those as well. So we're going to get into it. and I'll sort of farm them out, or if both of y'all have opinions, I'll sit back and just sort of moderate this. And I'm going to bounce around the Q&A, by the way. So just because I skip over one, I might go back to it. This is from Tom. Do you think there's any truth in the refrain that any business built on top of GPT-3 or another non-owned LLM isn't defensible? Either one of y'all. Not all at once.
Yeah, guys, it's fine. My quick thought is no. I think it definitely can be defensible. It really harps on what Adam was saying. To get to a delightful experience, that customized, personalized data, that competency, the generalized LLM is not going to have that. So that's really unique ability for differentiation exists. At least that's one area.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment. I think there are huge opportunities for startups in many different aspects where they do not need to build a from scratch large language model. I think the application, the interface, and then the customization for certain problems are huge opportunities for startups in this space. And data in particular, if you can get data sets that no one else can easily replicate or have, that is very defensible, because it's not the algorithms anymore. The algorithms are pretty out there and published, right? You need to have the base pre-trained model, but after that, it's really the data, the application, and the use of this technology.
Roger Kibbe, what would you say to educators who are freaking out about LLMs being used for plagiarism, et cetera? How can LLMs be used to enhance education?
That's a fun. I'm supposed to do a talk for the National School Board Association in 2 months from now, and I know that is going to be the #1 question. My response is that the world has changed. Just like when the web came out, the world has changed. It's going to change how we think, how we work. There's going to be positive aspects and negative aspects, but I don't think you can. I don't think you can ignore it, and I think you just need to find a way to harness the good. It's like people thought when the internet came out, plagiarism was going to be a major issue, that anyone could just find, term papers everywhere and just would copy them and use them. Whereas before the web, that wasn't easy to do. We survived and we leveraged it. And overall, I think the web is a boon for education. People also said, oh, anyone can put anything on the web. It's no longer an expert putting it into an encyclopedia or a reference book, but we needed to develop our own skills at determining what's the veracity of the information we're consuming, because it's not perfect. So I think there will be similar challenges with ChatGPT, but educators, I don't think should ban it. Yes, there will be some tools they can use to, is this large language model generated or not? But you basically need to give policies to your students. Students who will cheat, students who won't. And you need to encourage them to use this as a tool and to develop your own thinking on how to get the best out of it to improve your work and how not to. But it'll be interesting with the ability to generate text. You could argue that having a smartphone plus the internet means we don't have to remember things as much anymore, because we can look it up. Right? It actually might change the way we think. Our attention spans might be shorter because we're getting so much TikTok 7-second videos rather than sitting down with a long book or a slow newspaper. I'm sure there will be cultural and educational implications as well, good and bad. So it'll be an experience to see what that is.
Let me just add briefly, Adam, what I'm glad you're talking to the educational group. It's absolutely, because I've had many conversations with the headmaster at my kid's school, and they don't know what to do, right? They don't know what the right answer is. And so what they've done in the absence of that is nothing. And so my 6th grader was when he first started using it, is like, is this cheating? I go, well, that's a really good question. We probably ought to dig into that. And what's going to happen is people are all going to use ChatGPT or whatever LLM at the moment is, and their answers are going to look the same, right? There's going to be a lot of sameness in terms of both the writing and then the answers. So it's going to be an interesting evolution, but the thing they definitely shouldn't do, and that's why I'm glad you're speaking, the education group, is don't be the ostrich and stick your head in the sand. The kids don't know. Like my ninth grader won't touch it because he thinks it's cheating. He's like, no, I can't do that. I'm like, it's just unclear. And banning it's not the right answer. It's definitely going to disrupt education. Probably one of the biggest areas.
It's when I'm doing hiring now, I'm trying to like hire different people and we ask for code samples. I literally now have to say, you know, please make sure you write, if we're asking you to do this code sample, please write your own code. We want to test your experience, your ability to write code. Don't grab some open source code you'll find out on the web and don't generate it using ChatGPT. And I literally have to say that the intent is to be able to test your code. Yeah.
In the words of Bono, this Achtung baby, I think every poet is a cannibal, every artist is a thief, right? So it's like a computer stealing stuff from us or imitating us is not a huge deal. Humans have been doing it to each other for a long time. I'm going to ask this question from Stephen Charlap, MD. There's obviously a strong emphasis on the voice capabilities of these models. What about the visualization of a tangible entity, such as a virtual being or digital human, as part of advancing user engagement?
I'll just say a few words about it. We are coming a long way, but it's a very hard problem. Sam Altman says that he thinks the Turing test has been solved by ChatGPT. And, you know, meaning when you converse with this thing, it does feel like a human intelligence. I don't think we're quite there yet on solving the Turing test with an avatar or a virtual being. When we were doing Siri, we actually had this exact conversation. Should we have a paperclip avatar? Should we have a, you know, what should the experience be? And at the time, because, you know, I didn't think we could nail that experience. I preferred to let it be more like a book, right? Everyone gets, when you read a book, as opposed to a movie, you get to project your image of what this personality looks like or feels like. You get to be part author in the creation of that, that image. And I thought that would be a more appropriate thing for what we were able to do with the technology of the time. Today, we're getting close. You know, I do think it would, you know, change the way people perceive it if we had basically a movie version of a Siri or an Alexa. You know, but it's a hard problem. It can feel eerie. You know, you've heard of the uncanny valley, where if it's not real enough, it can get creepy and imperfect. So I'm still not 100% sure the value versus the risks are there yet, even with today's technology.
Mark, you good with that? Okay. I'm going to go to Dr. Ya. Can you speak to the importance of providing transparency regarding the training data sets used to develop AI models in order to ensure that people are aware of any potential biases and relevant exclusions that could affect the outputs?
Yeah, the biases question is an inherently insolvable problem, in my opinion, right? There's always gonna be biases because you're gonna have a human interface input at some point. Whoever programmed the computer that even made the interface has a bias. So it's like I asked ChatGPT, what's funny, right? Define humor, and it gives me this long thing. And then it starts going to really specialize, and you need to be culturally sensitive and this and that. So someone had to create that structure of thinking. Those biases are embedded. So I don't know that there's any way to say whose biases are the right biases or wrong biases, but I think once you have a human in the middle, it's impossible to eliminate that, in my opinion.
Adam, you good?
I'm good.
This is from Andrew, and we'll close with this. During the pandemic, I read a lot of literature coming out, mostly out of Stanford, about using LLMs and ontological type information about quickly developing better semantic parsers. The knowledge has been out there. Shouldn't we see at the very least an explosion in, say, better domain specific voice assistants? You kind of address this a little bit, but I feel like it's a decent one to end on.
Yeah. Like I said, I think the assistants of today, the voice assistants of today, will take some time to migrate to find that perfect blend. They kind of are what they are. ChatGPT and large language models are a little bit different. They have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think it'll take a couple years until we find the right blend of the two. That said, I think anyone working in kind of the voice AI space has to be, has to be starting from how am I going to use the large language models breakthroughs in what I'm doing, right? It didn't exist 10 years ago. It exists today, and it's an incredibly important starting point. So I do think all the semantic, knowledge-based, language-based tools are absolutely going to have to be looking at leveraging this technology going forward. It's just too important to ignore.
My wife has known that I've been doing this webinar today. She's a well-known attorney that works in securities for publicly traded companies. And that something we're doing has reached mass consumption when the lawyers are running scared. She's like, well, I just want to make sure everyone has a job. And I was like, well, you know what? Some will and some won't. Time will tell who. But this has got everybody's attention. It's captivated a whole lot of people. And it's fun to come together to talk about it. Adam, we're appreciative of you for your time and being part of Project Voice Capital Partners with us. Marc, I'm appreciative of you. Thank you as well. To the audience, thank you for giving us some of your time. We will send out the proceedings of the webinar shortly after it concludes, once we receive them from Zoom, as well as all the links to the fund, to the various other resources that we provided. I'm Bradley Metrock, CEO of Project Voice. Thank you for taking the time, and until next time.